Good evening, everyone. My name is Annapurna, and I'm a faculty member at the School of Development, Azim Premji University. We're delighted to welcome you all to this webinar on farmer-producer companies. We're happy that many people found our previous report on FPCs very useful. Many practitioners, students, and funding agencies have reached out to us, requesting us for data, have mentioned that the insights were particularly useful in their work. Overall, it was a very encouraging response. And even for today's event, we have close to 300 registrations. The webinar has two components. The first is that we'll present findings from our latest report on FPCs. It is called Farmer Producer Companies, Inclusion, Capitalization, and Incubation. This will be followed by a panel discussion on the themes of inclusion, capitalization, and incubation. And as you may have seen in the announcement, we have experts bringing in multiple perspectives in the panel discussion. So each of this will take about 20 minutes. The question and answer session will be towards the end. Please type your questions in the comments and make sure to address the questions to which of the panelists you'd like to respond. For example, you can address your questions to me or Richa. We are the authors of the report that we are presenting, or to one or all of the panelists. The webinar will end at 5:30 p.m. Right? So it is now over to Richa, faculty member at the School of Development, for presenting findings from our report. Over to you, Richa.
Sure. Thank you, Annapurna. Shashwat, could you present the slides, please? Thank you. Right. So as Annapurna pointed out, we are going to be presenting over the next 20 minutes findings from our second report on farmer-producer companies. I will apologize in advance. We just have a power outage at the campus, so in case I get dropped off, Annapurna will continue. Sorry about that. Okay, so let me get started. As many of you would know, we published a report 2 years ago, which was quite a comprehensive report focusing on trying to quantify the total number of producer companies in the country, and also analyzing the key characteristics, so geographical spread, age, paid up capital, etc. Understanding the key critical challenges of these companies and the overall sector. So that was the purpose and the focus of the previous report. That study was based on a meticulously compiled database of producer companies based on registration data from Ministry of Corporate Affairs website. And we corrected and updated that data for remissions. And we also conducted over 100 interviews with producer members of these companies, management and the boards, promoters, resource institutions, funders, government bodies, and so on. In the last 2 years, where are we today? So an additional 8,000 companies have been registered. Also, the policy for promotion of, the scheme for promotion of 10,000 FPOs was introduced, and some other policies which had some bearing on the landscape of producer companies. So we thought it's a good time for us to refresh the data. And this time around, we have focused on inclusion, marginalization of marginalized groups, capitalization trends, and also the nature of support needed for producer company sustainability. So before we go on to the current report, we will take a few minutes to go through the findings from the previous one. See, one of the main findings that we had was, there was quite a bit of difference in terms of the imagination of the purpose of these producer companies among different stakeholders. So, for example, small producers viewed these companies as basically non-exploitative buyers of their produce or providers of inputs. NGOs often hoped to grow these into local institutions. Large farmers often viewed them simply as business enterprises. And of course, as you can imagine, when there is a difference in the imagine purpose of an enterprise, you can imagine that there would be differences in how different aspects are prioritized and the kinds of investments that get made. And that's what we were seeing. Also, we found some gaps in quite significant gaps, rather, in the sense of ownership. So when we talk to small producers, often they will say, okay, this is the government's company or this is the NGO's company. And a few of them said that, okay, this is our company. But then we talk to them for a long time. After an hour, they will refer to the same company as being the government dairy. So these kinds of things highlighted to us that they have not really understood the nature of ownership of these companies. And that has a bearing on overall as a sector and, of course, the long-term sustainability of these companies. Second category of challenges that we identified had to do with compliance and shareholder protection. One board member of a producer company we visited said it the best. He said that my compliance requirements are the same as Narayan Murthy's of Infosys. Though not technically not true, but essentially the spirit of what he said, is something that is to be concerned about. So we're not advocating for reduction of compliance requirements, because there is actually a need to have certain requirements be met, which relates to our second point about shareholder protection. But how this compliance is done, whether it's through use of computer systems, English language, and so on, or it's forms of different kinds, paper forms. Right? So those kinds of things can be looked at. On the shareholder protection side, we found that shareholders were quite vulnerable to losses due to negligence, mismanagement, or outright fraud. And we observed this in some of the companies we visited, and also since then, a few larger cases have come to light in recent times. Third category of challenges were strategic and operational in nature. So inadequate access to equity and debt, and we'll talk a little bit more about that today also. But also lack of business acumen. And what we mean by this is, the promoting and support institutions would need to go beyond, creating a business plan, because after all, these are businesses. So they need to have ability and expertise in identifying business opportunities, in making strategic decisions, and so on. And that is an area that we found was lacking. And another aspect which exacerbated these issues were low producer loyalty. And often this happened in companies where there was only a single commodity. So you can imagine a wheat producer company, for example, right? And the number of interactions that a producer would have with the company would be what, 2 or 3 in over a year. And that led to low loyalty towards the company, because the company is not so central to their life and what is happening. We also found that, now if you shift to a sectoral level, right? So we also found that there were quite a few disparities in coverage and inclusion. What we mean by that is different parts of the country have different concentration in terms of number of producer companies. So for example, roughly half the companies at that time, by the end of financial year 2019, that is March of 2019, were in just 4 states in Maharashtra, UP, Tamil Nadu, and Madhya Pradesh. And this obviously does not relate well to the overall purpose of the producer companies. So let's see what the situation is now. This chart shows you year-wise registrations of producer companies in the country. And the ones in blue, they add up to 7,437. And since then, as I said, more than that amount number of companies have been registered in the last 2 years alone. Now, the question arises, who's promoting such a large number of producer companies? So we looked at the 10,000 FPU promotion scheme, and per the budgetary outlay, a maximum of 1,250 could have been promoted under that particular scheme. Now, there are other schemes and other department, budgets that can also be used, but under that scheme, only that many would come under that. So there are also a large number of philanthropies, CSR, which are promoting companies, and also there are quite a few self-promoted companies as well. This chart shows you the number of producer companies registered in each district over the last 2 years. This is only 2-year data. And here what becomes very, very evident, that there are areas districts where there are large numbers of companies that are being registered, very, very rapidly. And there are large swaths of the country where very little promotion activity is going on. In fact, the geographical concentration has worsened over the last 2 years. So if we just look at the last 2 years, more than half the companies have been promoted in just two states, almost 40% in Maharashtra and the rest in UP. Of course, you can see the blank areas where there are gaps in promotion activity. And, to contrast that, three districts in the country, and all of them in Maharashtra, have more than 400 producer companies each. There's also been a reduction in proportion of women-only PCs. So that percentage used to be 2.7% in the previous 16 years. So that's what we had reported in the previous report. But in the last 2 years of the companies that were registered, only 2.1% were women-only PCs. So, this indicates some intensification of exclusion issues. Which leaves out small producers in remote areas, as they're often called, or women producers. And this obviously is a concern from a policy objective perspective. Um, let's move to capitalization. So, the top line summary is that capitalization seems to have become a little worse. So, the rightmost column, what it shows you is of the companies that were promoted in the last 2 years. And here, when I'm saying last 2 years, our data goes up to March 2021. Okay. So, it covers two financial years, FY20 and FY21. So those companies were able to, what was the paid up capital they were able to reach by the end of those 2 years, and about 18% of those companies were able to cross 5 lakhs. Compare that to a similar analysis for the previous period. 23% of the companies were able to reach that benchmark. Now, why is that benchmark important? By both from accounts of practitioners and also from NABARD's own thinking. You need at least 3 to 5 lakhs of capital to be able to start operations or even generate interest among those who can provide debt to companies. So that seems like a good threshold to think about to reach. So from that indicator, it's been worsening. Because we had good, clean data for the paid up capital of companies by the end of 2019 financial year, we were able to see for those companies which already existed, how has that paid up capital changed over the last 2 years? And we found that 70% of them have seen no change at all. 70%. About a quarter were able to see significant growth, so 1 lakh or more, and the rest numbers you can see here. Now, this is a mixed news, right? So it's, on the one hand, it's nice to see that almost a quarter of these companies are able to grow. And here we're using growth in paid up capital as a rough proxy for business activity, because that data is not available from the Ministry of Corporate Affairs. So if we use it as a proxy, then it's a good news to see. But on the other hand, of course, the large majority of companies are not able to see any movement at all. So we also try to understand, of the companies which are growing, which companies are growing, right? So we try to look at it by age, and we did not see any clear pattern. But what we did see some pattern in terms of was their starting capital, right? So remember, this is analysis of companies which already existed 2 years ago, as of March 2019, and what has happened to their paid up capital. So if they already had high paid up capital at that time, they were more likely to grow. It's not surprising, but it's it is interesting to note that these are the kinds of companies which were more likely to grow. So what does this this gives us a landscape sort of where we are. We also looked at the policy itself and tried to understand it from a financial and an operational perspective. So this page, let me cover the financial side. So the total budgetary outlay has been rupees 6,866 crore. Now we try to categorize the outlay in different categories, right? So we found, for example, 41% is designated for engagement with CBPOs. These are the cluster-based business organizations which are supposed to promote the producer companies. 33% is designated for these two schemes, the equity grant and the credit guarantee schemes. But our analysis shows that if you look at the entire set of companies, only less than even 4% qualify for these schemes, and we'll come to that in a bit. 19%, interestingly, is allocated towards CEO and accountant salaries. Now, often, as we know, often these roles are played by resource persons temporarily deputed to the FPOs from these promoting entities, institutions, the CBPOs. The tricky thing here is that often, and more often than not, actually, once the project ends or the CBPO withdraws, these individuals go back to their home institution, which is the CBBO. So whether this really contributes to the long-term sustainability of the FPO or not is debatable. And so therefore, what we are left with is really 3.5% direct funding that is very, very cleanly going to the FPO. And this is something that we should think about. Is this the appropriate amount of direct funding for such a large government program? This slide number 10, we try to summarize some of the operational implications of the policy on operational matters. So, for example, the scheme envisions that producer companies and FPOs in general would be promoted in a federated model. Plus, there is a federation that gets formed. However, if you look at the ground reality, majority of them are being promoted in a standalone mode. And the implication of this is that they have to fend for themselves essentially and create their own business ecosystems, which is very, very, very hard to do. The scheme also does not really imagine other kinds of models. So the two-tier model, which we had talked about in our previous report, where you have a cluster of a collective of companies, most of them supplying their produce to a market-facing company, which is better capitalized and is able to perhaps even do processing and so on. Now, those kinds of models are not imagined as part of the policy. And that restricts what is possible in many different ways, not the least of which is that there is no additional funding that can really come into the system if this is a federated system only. Secondly, CBPOs are not required by the scheme to have the ability to incubate new businesses, right? And this is the term we are using from the business world. Of course, any startup needs incubation, not just registration. And that is what we are trying to get at here, is that the ability to identify business opportunities, have that business savviness, ability to make business decisions. Even instituting strong internal governance processes takes different kinds of skills, going beyond compliance. And those are not mandated. So certainly there are CBBOs which are able to do this and do this very, very well. However, that's not the largest number of CBBOs, right? So it's important from a policy perspective to see, to bring about, this kind of an orientation. And certainly, as I mentioned earlier, this policy also does not really add any provisions for protection of smallholder shareholders. So, what does this all bring us to? Essentially, what we are seeing are a bit troubling signs. We are seeing rapid growth, right? So, thousands and thousands of companies being registered in the span of just 1 year, but the quality remains questionable. We see an overall pattern of worsening inclusion metrics, so like geographical concentration or number of percentage of women-only PCs, and capitalization metrics, though there is that nice thing to see that roughly 25% of the companies were able to grow, the vast majority are not. We also looked at the Ministry of Corporate Affairs data on striking off of companies. So what they do is, due to lack of compliance or lack of even starting of operations, they can strike off companies, they basically invalidate them. And we noticed that companies which are 7 years or older, almost half of them had been struck off. And because it takes the MCA some years to review, provide opportunity to respond, etc. I mean, this is not a number that you will see, for example, companies which are only 2 years old, but this is quite troubling as well. So the policies are unable to really shift the focus from registration, promotion and registration to incubation. And that's why we are calling it, as indicative of perhaps a bubble forming in the sector. So, in terms of way forward, we are suggesting five areas. One is certainly improving the inclusion metrics. So, women-only PCs in rain-fed Adivasi regions, aspirational districts, and perhaps if you're working in a resource-constrained environment, then de-emphasize promotion in the high-density districts. Also, selection of suitable operating models. So we think that it's essential that producer companies be promoted in groups. Now, how that group is structured, whether it's a federated model or it's a two-tier model or something else entirely, I mean, that should be determined based on the local context and also the kinds of commodities that are being handled. But what is important that they be promoted in a group, in groups, which makes many of these challenges much easier to address. Thirdly, just like any startup, they need incubation support and not just support in registering them. And this requires various capacities that I've already talked about. And, so therefore, CBPOs will also have to be reimagined as business incubators and not just promoters. And perhaps one way to even go even one step further would be to say that, should the effectiveness measures of a CBPO be what percentage of the companies have been able to secure a government or non-government external funding, essentially. On the funding side, if we stay within the bounds of the current policy environment, then the only real way to bring in external money, besides debt, is promoting in a two-tier model, which I described earlier, and especially if the market-facing company is registered as a private company, private limited company, then external funding for activities which require greater capital, like processing, etc., is possible. But perhaps it's important also to consider some modifications to the policy environment, right? So should we examine eligibility requirements for various schemes and see how they can be tweaked to enable greater percentage of companies to qualify for them, or modifying the Companies Act itself to allow PCs to raise external capital, of course, with restrictions to protect farmers' rights. But this could be done through alternate, shares and other mechanisms. Also allowing PCs to list on the proposed social stock exchange that would also offer them an opportunity to raise funds. And lastly, as we mentioned earlier, we think that stronger shareholder protection is absolutely important because now we have millions and millions of small producers which are part of these companies. And they really do not have the awareness of their rights or the power to be able to prevent or safeguard themselves against malpractice or fraud. So we think that that's an important change that needs to be brought in. So that brings me to the to the end of our summary of findings from the current report. Thank you, and the soft copies will be available in the next couple of days. I will turn over to my colleague.
Thank you, Richa. Like Richa said, the soft copy of the report will be available on the university website, hopefully by tomorrow or latest, we may take another day. Now we come to the panel discussion. Today's panelists need no introduction, and it's actually a privilege to introduce them. And I regret that I'm unable to do justice, to the introduction given the paucity of time, right? I mean, they all come with decades of experience. They have looked at farmer producer companies from multiple perspectives. They are very well known in the sector and so on. So I will introduce the panelists first, and then we'll have specific questions for each one of them, based on which they will, discuss their insights, their experience, and so on. Each of them will discuss for about 5 minutes. At the end of the panel discussion is when we will have the Q&A session, like I mentioned before. So please keep typing your questions in the comments. We have Dr. Ashok Alur, who is the director for the Center of Excellence for Farmer Producer Organizations, Karnataka. He has over 2 decades of experience in different areas of natural resource management, agriculture, horticulture, rural development, uh, promotion of FPOs, etc. Currently, he is leading the team of experts at the Center of Excellence for Farmer Producer Companies in training and building and capacity of farmer producer organizations in Karnataka. We have Ms. Dhruvi Shah, who is the Executive Trustee and Chief Executive Officer of Axis Bank Foundation. She heads the foundation's programs, which aims to create sustainable livelihoods for rural communities in India by enhancing and diversifying their streams of income. Uh, Dhruvi has over 24 years of experience spanning banking, microfinance, and rural development. She has also shaped the philanthropy and corporate citizenship engagement for the Royal Bank of Scotland. Uh, and our third panelist for today is Dr. Vadivel. Dr. Vadivel was formerly the Dean Horticulture and Director Extension Education at Tamil Nadu Agricultural University. He is currently the project officer at Erode Precision Farm Producer Company Limited, and he has served on multiple committees and on the task force set up by SFAC on farmer producer companies. Um, he's also been a state level consultant on issues related to agriculture and producer collectives. Uh, uh, as the part of Erode Precision Farm Producer Company, Dr. Vadivel was involved in incubation of 97 producer organizations in the country. So the first question we have is for Dr. Ashok Alur. So Richa mentioned in the PPT, and we found that although we have nearly 16,000 producer companies in the country as on date, there are still some gaps. There are still some districts that are left out, districts with marginalized producers, especially, that are left out. Certain groups of vulnerable and marginalized producers who still are not part of producer companies. So our question for him is, how do we ensure that producer companies are promoted in an inclusive manner, covering marginalized producers, women, and aspirational districts? Dr. Alur, over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Annapurna. The question is very interesting because you have raised a very interesting point with regard to inclusion of small and marginal farmers in the producer companies. And also, we are also trying to look at how do we involve the women producers, and also in what way we can lay more emphasis on the aspirational districts. I will try to, put these 3 points separately and then try to answer, based on the experience. With regard to the inclusion of small and marginal farmers in the producer companies, I will always try to take the example of Karnataka state so that the points are more clear. If you look at the Government of India strategy, it lays a very clear emphasis on the inclusion of small and marginal farmers on priority. Basically, the entire concept is meant for small and marginal farmers, and so also the policy of the Karnataka state. So the Karnataka state policy also very clearly defines FPO as the collectivization, an institution with the collectivization of small and marginal farmers. It means policy-wise, strategy-wise, the focus is very, very clear on including small and marginal farmers on a priority. So how do we ensure it is one point that we need to discuss. If you look at the designing of the financial schemes, they are designed in such a way that they encourage or lays a prerequisite for ensuring the representation of small and marginal farmers in the POs. For example, if I want to quote the example of availing equity grants, given by the Government of India through SFAC, it very clearly lays a criteria that minimum of 33% of its shareholders should be small and marginal farmers. Otherwise, that PC is not eligible to, receive the equity grants. So the second thing, if you look at the shareholding pattern, one person, one member can, other than the institutional member, cannot hold more than 5% of the equity of the equity shares. So this avoids holding of additional shares by the rich farmers or the big farmers. But however, when it comes to Karnataka, we have made it mandatory: one farmer, one share, one farmer, one home. So we have ensured that there is a clear-cut provision, or scope is given to small and marginal farmers. If you look at, there is a provision also to have the membership of the producer companies in another producer company. In that case, the institutional member should not be holding more than 10% of the equity of that PC. It means we are also trying to see that only PCs do not dominate another PC. If you look at the FPO, I mean, looking at the board of directors, with minimum is 5 numbers, and we also look for adequate representation of small and marginal farmers in the board of directors. But one member, woman member, is compulsory if at all a PC wants to avail the benefits of the government. So, if you look at the Karnataka state, again I'll quote the example of Karnataka. We have now come out with promoting producer organizations for fishermen, weavers, sheep and goat keepers. The idea is to bring them under the gamut of producer organizations, which were earlier left out. So this is also a strategy to include such categories in the entire FPO sector. And Karnataka has also set another example of promoting about 18 farmer producer companies exclusively for the Banjara farmers, who are basically, earlier they were the tribal farmers, now they are scheduled caste farmers. And these are exclusively meant for them, as more than 90% of them are small and marginal. Maybe 5 to 10% farmers may hold little more land. So that's another important initiative. And Karnataka is another state which has promoted several tribal FPUs exclusively for the farmers who have been shifted from the tribal settlements. So all these initiatives, both central and state government, indicates a focused efforts towards including small and marginal farmers in the entire FPO movement. Coming back to the inclusion of women farmers in the producer company, this is a very interesting phenomenon. As we are aware that any woman farmer who owns a land in her name, or as a wife of a farmer, she can definitely be the member, through getting a certificate through the tahsils and the revenue officers. So we have ensured in Karnataka we have several 100% women membered FPOs, even under central sector scheme, under state sector scheme. If you take the example of our tribal FPOs, which our Center of Excellence is handholding, over 25% members are there on the board of directors. And if you look at the number of women members who are participating in the activities, in the training programs, capacity building, it's almost 50-50%. So that's where we are trying to ensure that they participate in the program. And it is not just the number, we are trying to see that they are part of the decision making in these FPOs. And the last part, which talks about the aspirational districts, as we are all aware, the aspirational districts are those districts in India which are affected by the poor socio-economic indicators. And these aspirational districts, in the context of improvement, it can lead to overall improvement in the human development in the Indian context. So around 115 plus districts have been identified from the different states. At least we have 1 or 2 districts in each of the states. In some cases, it is 10 plus or something like that. And the entire program of aspirational districts is anchored by Niti Aayog in the country, and based on about 49 indicators from 5 different identified thematic areas, which closely focuses on improving people's health, nutrition, education, agriculture, water resources, financial inclusion, skill development, and even basic infrastructure. So many of the states are laying a lot of focus on this. And if you look at the broad contours of the aspirational districts, again, taking the example of Karnataka, I should say they look at the convergence of the existing programs, bringing together the horizontal and vertical tiers of the government in these districts, collaboration of both central, state government schemes, so that these schemes are put together and implemented for the benefit of the people in such districts. Also, they also will promote the sense of competition among the districts, by driving the spirit of mass movement, and it also helps in fostering the accountability in the district administration. So looking that, if I have to quote the example of Karnataka, so we have at least 4 districts, which are aspirational districts in Karnataka. For example, if I take the district of Raichur, we have 7 taluks under central sector scheme. We are ensuring that each taluk gets one FPO, and it has 43 hoblies. As of now, Raichur district has 37 farmer producer organizations promoted under both state and central sector scheme. We are short by about 13 in this statistic. I'm not counting, I'm not taking the count of FPOs promoted by other agencies like philanthropic institutions, banks, and other things. I'm just trying to focus on FPOs promoted by the government development departments, both under central and state sector schemes. If you take Adgir has got 6 taluks and 16 hoblies. Even if you put them together, they are 22, but already we have 25 registered FPOs supported by central and state sector schemes. If you take Gadag has 5 taluks and 11 hoblies. We should have at least 16 FPOs, both taluk level and hobli level, but already we have 29 registered FPOs in Gadag. And lastly, Kalaburgi has 10 taluks and 32 hoblies, and we already have 45 registered FPOs in this case, except in case of Raichur. We have taken that the skewed distribution which we were discussing in the report is addressed in these 4 aspirational districts. So what I wish to say here is, it is basically the focused attention towards the allocation, focused attention towards building their capacities. It is again in the quoting the example of Karnataka, we are now trying to come out with a common brand for all the FPO produced in the state. We are also trying to set up an incubator exclusively for FPOs. We have already set up a center of excellence to handhold, build the capacities of farmer producer organizations in the state. So all these 3 points put together, I think we are in a direction to see that the inclusion of small and marginal farmers, women farmers, and specifically in the aspirational districts, things have been addressed. Maybe in some cases, there are several states. I was trying to look at it. In case of Maharashtra, we have few districts where there are more than 400, but that may not be the case in the
Dr.
state.
Alur, I'm so yeah,
Yeah.
I'm so sorry to interrupt you, but I think we went a little beyond time, but that's absolutely fine. Thank you so much for those insights. In fact, from your points, I get that the policy and strategy, as far as the policy and the strategic guidelines for implementing the policy are concerned, uh, there are clear guidelines for inclusion of the marginalized and the excluded producers. And some of the schemes like the equity grants and so on are promoting this inclusion by mandating that 33% should be small and marginal farmers, or that there should be women board members. And one thing that has come out quite interesting from what you're doing in Karnataka is how you're focusing on specific livelihood activities, right? Especially those where one would find marginal producers, for example, sheep and goat rearing, or fishermen, or the tribal farmers. Promoting producer companies for tribal farmers, and how many of the producer companies promoted by the government have around 25% women as board members, and also the women participation in the capacity building and so on. Just to roughly to summarize what you have said, this is very encouraging. This is very encouraging, and hopefully in the coming years we see that we no longer talk about disparities in inclusion. But that brings, I keep wondering, and I will now ask Ms. Dhruvi Shah about this. See, I keep wondering, right? On one hand, we say inclusion, we want small farmers, marginalized producers. And on the other hand, we are talking about producer companies which are like businesses, right, which need capital. So it's not just forming, collectivizing farmers, but from then onwards the real work starts. And for that we need money, and we need capital. We know that the small and marginal farmers, it is unfair to expect them to put in money as equity, in her presentation, which I also mentioned, that many producer companies, even after 2 years after registration, find it difficult to reach even 5 lakhs, right? And which is the eligibility amount for equity grants. So, in that case, my question for you is, what are the different ways in which capitalization of PCs can be improved, and how can we improve their access to debt? Over to you, Dhruvi.
Yeah. Uh, Thank you. I think the tagline of your report, which is incubation, capitalization, and inclusion, is very well. It sets the context of what one needs to look at when we want to see FPO succeed. And the purpose of the FPO will only be met if the farmers are able to derive a better price realization, or reduce their cost through aggregation of input. And all of this will only happen if these three things happen together, and that is exactly what is not happening, right? uh, we are not getting the right amount of capital at the right time. And by capital, I just don't mean the equity that the community has to contribute. You first have to understand that small and marginal farmers are, a lot of them are subsistence farmers. So there is not any surplus available with them, even if they sell in the market, to get more money to invest in the company, right? Yes, they are owners of the company, but do they really own it? They will own it when they see benefits coming out of it, right? So the policy around which restricts capital, and to an extent it's correct. If they allow non-producers to become shareholders, there is going to be a lot of other issues that will start happening in the producers. So it's a bit of a chicken and egg situation. Now, till such time producers are able to invest their own money, there needs to be alternate available, which can come in the form of different kinds of subsidies, because today also you are subsidizing them in some way or the other. Why can't those subsidies come through a different medium and become a source of income for the community? So, for example, people who buy from the producer companies are probably have better capital access. Can there be trade products that can be created which do not require, or which are able to give advance to the community or to the FPO, so that they are able to buy from the farmers? See, until the farmer is paid at the farm gate, right, they are not going to sell to the FPC. So these are other mechanisms which are very well available in our ecosystem of trade, which need to be incorporated for the FPC. As Richa mentioned during her study, there needs to be some policy change as well, so that both the schemes by SFSC, both the equity and the credit guarantee, if you look at the uptake, is extremely low. What you need is a guarantee scheme across the value chain through which the product and the money moves. But are people able to access? I mean, if you look at the reports that are uploaded in the website, about 15 to 20 companies are able to avail the credit guarantee scheme, and that is a minuscule percentage. I mean, just look at the capitalization that is required: 16,000 FPCs. Even if you say 2,000 members into whatever number, I mean, look at that. Where is that kind of money? Who has that kind of money? So just by setting up uh, FPOs, and even broad basing it for inclusion, is not really inclusion. By becoming a member, you're not included, you're just a member somewhere. Inclusion will happen when they are able to receive the price realization. And we have not even started the conversation on, is the FPC really leading to better price realization, right? Those are not conversations we know, those are not data that we have. So maybe in a report, if you are coming out with a third report, maybe you want to focus on how are the FPCs helping, and in what circumstances are farmers really able to realize a better outcome for them. So there are multiple challenges and very little avenues. unless there is going to be a policy thrust around it. Uh, See, today there is a provision in priority sector lending. It is increasing, but there are also credit risks involved. So it's not easy to for the banks to start lending until the risk is kind of mitigated in that process, right? There are NBFCs who lend to FPCs, but the rates of interest kind of cover for the risk they are taking. So there needs to be a different kind of system that needs to be developed to support, maybe not forever, but at least in the initial 5 to 7 years, for the FPCs to start becoming operationally surplus enough to derive benefit for the farmer. Otherwise, the farmer will remain a member, but he will continue to sell in the mandi or to anybody and not to the FPC, right? So there's a lot of chicken or kind of situations across. Uh, and the crux lies basically is in the purpose. If you're looking at small and marginal farmer, are you designing the policy for inclusion beyond membership? I think that's the question we need to really ask. Are you looking at inclusion beyond becoming a shareholder, beyond becoming a member? And from there, you will start answering all the questions that arise. And uh, 16,000 FPCs, if they are not going to operate, there is no inclusion that is really going to happen. Yeah, so that's all I would like to say.
Thank you very much. I think this is a very important point. How do we define inclusion? What do we mean by
Yeah,
inclusion? Right? So it is
yeah,
not just about, that we have maybe we paid 500 rupees and became a shareholder in an FPC, but are we realizing, are we actually supplying to the FPC and realizing better,
the way-
a better price realization is there? Are we able to, what is it that the producers are able to gain? And I think the point is really wonderful, that we all should recognize that the small and marginal producers are not able to generate surplus. So how
yeah,
do we, by promoting an FPC, how do we ensure that they are able to generate surplus, which part of which can go into the capital of the
into the
company? That is,
yeah,
and absolutely, I mean, that is one point I think all of us should think about, not just through an equity grant, which is probably a one-time grant, or one-time, if
yeah.
they contribute 15 lakhs, they will get 15 lakhs. But even otherwise, to reach the
15 lakh.
eligibility for equity grant, right?
Yes.
To reach that 5 lakhs of capital, I think that thought process has to start. And
Start.
another thing we all the time say is that while there are schemes, I mean, for example, while under priority sector lending, there are multiple schemes, multiple avenues for farmers to avail credit, or FPOs to avail credit. Unfortunately, we don't recognize that, the risks associated, right? We don't recognize the risks associated. Then how do we make sure that the equity side is strengthened, on the basis of which farmers can also avail
And avail the debt.
debt, right? FPCs can avail debt. I think, yes, some discussion, and some kind of a mechanism that allows this is definitely the need. And thank you very much for pointing this out. This is a very useful and a valid point. So now, Dr. Vadivel, coming to you. See, I will take on from what Ms. Dhruvi has been saying, right? So, how do we ensure that FPCs create surplus? FPCs enable better price realization and surplus for marginal farmers. So, it is quite clear that they need incubation, but that incubation probably just doesn't come with having maybe a CEO or other key management personnel for 3 years, right? Which is essentially what the scheme provides for now. But we need to go beyond this. And really, is 3 years adequate for building the capacity as well as knowledge transfer, right? So just want to know your thoughts on how do we then, what kind of incubation do FPCs need, and what
Right.
are the ways in which this can be provided? So, with the experience of promoting 97 producer companies, If you could just share your experience on these lines, on these
Okay.
questions.
Thank you for the opportunity to meet you all and discuss with the panelists and the participants. It was a journey of 2 decades. That is 2002, the Company Act was amended, and now it is 2022, 20 years of journey, focusing much on formation and promotion of FEOs. So let this process continue for another few decades, no issue. But as per the study, university study, now the time has come to analyze the FEOs with the total ecosystem and how to incubate. So this is the right stage to intervene, learn experience from the past, and do some incubation process so that they are viable, they are really able to generate surplus, and then real economic benefit reaches the farm holding. Say, if you look back and analyze the 15,000 FEOs across the country and 800 odd FEOs in Tamil Nadu and the 97 FEOs with which we are working, we need to classify these FEOs into 3 categories. The one is matured and top rated, maybe 20% approximately, and medium role, medium matured FEOs, another 40%, and struggling FEOs, another 40%. It's all approximate categorization. So a general formula of incubation may not suit for all. So that is why let us look into 3 different categories and 3 different approaches to incubate and the means. The first one, the stakeholders in the supply chain across the country for all major commodities will have to be replaced by FEOs across the country. Pan-India FEO network for business transactions should be created. Say, this will happen only when district level FEOs are made into state level apex FEOs, and all the state level apex FEOs, if they will have to get into national level FEOs on different commodities. So this kind of consolidation and then taking up the business transaction among the FEOs will slowly replace the middlemen who are now in the stakeholder stage. So that is the first point I would like to convey. Then in many of the state and central government programs, in the online application process, there is a provision only for individual farmer, and the benefit transfer goes to individual farmer. There is no provision for FEOs to get into that portal and apply for on behalf of all the members of the FEO. So this needs to be one of the major issue, because many of the government schemes of different departments are not getting into FEO system right now because of the individual farmer customized portal. So this needs to be addressed. Then compared to week-long training or month-long training, the exposure visit to national and international exhibitions, maybe across the country or elsewhere in the world. So this really, among the 27 extension tools which we are implementing, which we have been following, there's nothing like participation in the national and international expos. So they get multiple benefits out of such visits. And then now the matured FEOs are looking for export. So day in and day out, the policies are changing and systems are changing, protocols are changing, and the international transaction, many countries, they change in the WTO arena, they change their procedures. So there is a dedicated desktop to deal with FEOs which are on the export front. And then the IT exemption for 5 years, it is only in the paper, because the income earned out of the transaction with the member farmer alone is exempted, not the FEO's whole income generated out of general business. So this needs to be amended. So with regard to the medium rated FEOs, physical market to some extent they are exposed, whereas this online marketing, whether it is e-trading or e-nam or NEML or any kind of platform or WhatsApp group and Facebook method of transaction and business, it is yet to reach the middle level FEOs. So the middle, if you start, we can leave alone the for matured FEOs. If you work with the medium level FECs 40%, then we will be taking around 60% FEOs on the positive side. And the struggling FEOs, it may take another 1 decade to fall in line. And let us not worry too much about the struggling. It is always there. It is in the developmental process that we need to accept. And in the medium level, on the pilot scale, they do good business. But when the question of scaled up business comes, the psychic barrier is there to take risk. The risk and profit, it is interlinked. So scaled up business with 40 lakhs or 50 lakhs or 1 crore or 2 crore, this psychic barrier needs to be broken, and entrepreneurial skill needs to be imparted to this segment of FEOs. And then the supply chain, value chain, and blockchain system is now emerging. This needs to be properly imparted on the minds of the board of directors. Only then they will have a clear vision on their business, and then work for surplus production and work for post-harvest management and value addition. This is for the middle category. In the last category, RIs and the government will have to travel them for few more years so that they reach the shore. If you leave it at the end of the third year and come back, and then they stay there, and the struggle continues. So there must be some provision to extend the period of even after the project completion. There should be some mechanism to incubate those FEOs, struggling FEOs. And most of the crisis, it is all in between, political or communal or local. So that will take long time to address. So for them to break, it is nothing but exposure visits to markets and exposure visit to reputed institutions. So only this will break the ice. So no amount of counseling, no amount of teaching, no amount of training will help. Nothing but exposure visit to reputed FECs and also exposure visits to various markets. So our approach must be three-pronged for matured FEOs, middle-level FEOs, and struggling FEOs. If we design this way, in course of time, the incubation process will be successful.
Thank you very much, Dr. Vadivel. I think you have very nicely classified the needs of different categories of FPOs, and the recognition that each category requires different kinds of support at different points in their life cycle, right? So those are at the very low end of the spectrum, need a different kind of handholding. And linking to what Ms. Dhruvi said, the point is to enable them to generate surplus and better price realization, right? And for the mature FPOs, whereas it is quite different, how would we encourage them to export, right? Export promotion, how would we then handhold, support them in export promotion and so on. So there's a wide spectrum, actually, and I think it is definitely for the promoting institutions and the CBBOs to recognize this difference in the kind of FPOs that they have promoted and tailor the support accordingly. This is very much. Thank you very much. So, and also, I think the point about creating. I think one very interesting point is actually about the FPOs can become the buyers of other FPOs, right? So trade among FPOs being encouraged. That is another very interesting. Yes, India. That is another very interesting. So we do talk about where will FPOs find the buyers? It's so difficult for them, but actually this kind of creating this kind of a support that. This kind of trade between FPOs is definitely very, a way out, very nice way out.
Middlemen cannot be eliminated, but they can be substituted with FPOs.
Yes.
That role will be played by FPOs in future.
Yes. Thank you very much. So we have some questions, and Richa is posting them in the comment box. So I will read out the question, and This is all three of you can answer one after the other your thoughts on this. So the first question is, can the dip in general inclusivity and low number of women-led FPCs be a temporary dip as a result of the pandemic? Right? For example, if we talk about women-led FPCs, it could be because increased responsibilities of women at the household level and general dip in income and so on. So I think the question is, I mean, can we is this due to the effect of the pandemic? I think we can start with Dr. Vadivel and then
Yes.
Dr. Alur.
Right
and,
now,
then
the women FUs available across the country are a conversion of already existing women club, women self-help group, either by NABARD or so many other groups. So, new FUs exclusively with women members created exclusive for this purpose, and the percentage may be hardly 10% out of the women FPCs. So, in the past, I think 90%, the already women members in the self-help group, that's a big ocean. So they were converted, particularly NABARD. Almost NABARD, the conversion of from a self-help group into a company. So that was the scenario. So this emergence, only now new FUOs from 100% women are being created. So farm women groundnut farmers producer company, which we have created in Viluppuram district. It is entirely FIG wise, it is awareness created, and then the company was created. So that momentum has just started. All the past are only transfer from one cluster to into a company.
So, in my view, basically, bringing women into the FPOs, they're basically enhancing their membership. There are a lot of issues with the ownership. So, one, compulsion is they should own the land in their own name. In most of the cases, lands are owned by men, and in many cases, men want to be the members. There are several cases, maybe with lot of dialogue, discussion with them, the woman as a member of the family through family tree and getting a certificate from the revenue side, they can definitely become the members. So that awareness has to be created, so that though woman contributes more than 50-60% in the entire agricultural production, but their membership on the FPCs is still very low, and we need to address this issue. Basically, when we restrict that they should own their land in their name, then automatically only men will move further and then become the members. So though there is a provision that as a member of the family, as a wife of a landowner, she also has a share. Through that family tree, she can be the member in place of her husband. So that has to be encouraged, so that woman membership becomes more and more in these FPCs. And I don't think it's only because of the pandemic. In case of pandemic, men in most of the cases have shared lot of kitchen responsibilities along with women. Only when there is no pandemic, women have more responsibilities than the men. Men have, this is all, I hope at least two of us, myself and Professor Vadivel, will agree for this. We have shared responsibilities in the kitchen. That's not the reason for, dip in the membership.
No, I agree to them. I think they've covered what's the reality on that. Nothing. I don't have.
Okay, thank you. So we have another. I mean, I just want to add a point here, and which I think you can also add. I mean, to the same question, right? Uh, I don't know if the general inclusivity can be attributed to COVID. I mean, we have not actually in our study we have not looked at the impact of COVID, but what we have seen is that the number of companies registered has dramatically increased. So when we are talking about thousands of companies registered during the pandemic year, uh, and then this dip in inclusion, right? Inclusion metrics. So that is something that probably needs to look into, right? That we have not really related to the pandemic in that sense. Yeah. Coming to the second question, how do we ensure that the FPCs that are being promoted are indeed quality enterprises, rather than just claiming that we have promoted so many FPCs in so many districts and so on, rather than being just a number game. So, what kind of maybe how can we make sure? How can we ensure that we are promoting quality FPCs?
Only two aspects, madam. Right, while joining in the company, all are shareholders. So, in course of time, the active members who do business, who do some kind of transaction with the FEO, if that number is increased, then the company becomes qualitative. Equally, if there are only one enterprising BOD, if it becomes two or three in course of time, then it also supports for quality FEO. So when more of active farmers who are participating in the business of the company and more of enterprising BODs, then that company grows fast and matures fast. So that is the quality indicator. So that is why we introduced a new system called management audit. So it is a self audit or a third party audit that way. So along with the annual report, we ask for management audit. So they should know their position. In ROC compliance, are they weak? In business transaction, are they weak? Or in managing the overall human resource, are they weak? So different segments, strength and weakness, it is indicated. So only by introducing management audit, we will come to know what is the active for what percentage active farmer and what percentage of enterprising farmer. So that way the quality FUs can be generated.
Yes.
Points
Thank
raised by,
you, Dr. Vadivel.
Dr.
Yeah.
Vadivel. I mean, if I look at the existing, FPOs, it is important that we should have a good leadership. In most of the cases, wherever we have a excellent leadership, good democratic practices, those enterprises have FPs have really, marched forward, and especially with regard to the transparency in their entire management. As Dr. Vadivel is mentioning, in case of Karnataka, we have developed a evaluation tool. So the tool is not just to extend financial support to the FPOs. The tool will also identify their weak areas. We need to bridge those weak areas, tag those points, and help them to move to the next level. So this is very important. One thing which really bothers me in most of the cases, people, we have just a 5-6 years history of FPOs in the entire country or in the state, but the expectations are very high. People want these FPOs to really run the marathon. They have just walked. They're just trying to step further, and we expect that they run a marathon. As you mentioned while you presenting the report, that the FPOs are compared with the best big corporates. It's very difficult for them to do it. They need a lot of hand holding. We need to identify their weak areas, bridge those gaps, and then also train. It's a focused training, a good exposure for the BOD. How do we build, a sense of ownership among them? So all these are very, very important. And also keeping the members doing the entire business, participating actively. Many times, if you look at the BOD, meeting attendance and the annual general body, it's dipping. So all these are very, very important points so that we can ensure the FPOs on a quality aspect, not just for the sake of promoting the numbers.
So
It's very
one simple mechanism we are introducing to upgrade and FEO and qualitative manner. That is the first agenda in every board meeting. It is discussion on the financial statement of the past month. So the first agenda, it should not be read. It should not be by speech. The copy should have to be given to all the board members. Let them go through. and item-wise expenditure, item-wise receipt, let them examine. So this financial transparency, if it is ensured, it gives a strong foundation for the FPO.
Uh, Dhruvi, you were saying something. Yeah.
No, it's Dr. Alur is saying a very, very valid point is that you have to handhold them for a very long period of time. The capacities are low. We are expecting them to suddenly from farmers to become managers and board of directors and run a profitable company. I think we are putting too much of burden on them.
Exactly.
But on the other side, there is no supporting system today. An NGO is not supposed to handhold. We do. There are our projects and our, it is there in the ecosystem. There is a support. There is handholding support that goes on to to people in the FPO, to people who run FPO, but it's not going to sustain for a very, very long period of time because uh, there is no other money which is coming in the system. Unlike, yes, I understand Karnataka has a very robust policy around supporting an ecosystem in which an FPO can sustain. But I'm not too sure if other states have it. And most of it is dependent today on some or the other indirect project. There are no projects to support an FPO ecosystem, right? It is dependent, for example, in our livelihood program, FPOs are one of the constituent and we support them to an extent, but it's not designed to support them. And I don't see a program which is designed to support FPOs for 6 to 7 years. So, unless that happens parallelly to the business that is growing, at some point there will be dips in the performance of the FPO. And you kind of take two-step back and two-step forward some point of time.
And
Let me add
also the
one. Let me
need
add one
for,
more point.
oh, sorry, please.
Uh, Out of 100 RIs or CBBOs, hardly 5 are from the business entity. Rest 95 are NGOs whose domain strength is only development and
Yeah,
service.
yeah, not
So they are
business.
not able to give business footage.
Yeah.
That is a real inherent weakness in the RI and the CBBO system. Madam.
Right, right. But
So,
there
but
are no
that's
other organizations who are willing to take this responsibility other than the NGOs because they see the benefit going to the farmer. So
Only
they are doing all the heavy lifting. But they, like you rightly said, they don't have the business acumen or the business connect, and that's where it starts becoming a little weaker proposition for everybody.
So
no,
only in the
it's also
CBBO
again.
system, out of 247, hardly you see many of the commercial enterprises. In the RI system and POPA, if you take, almost 99% are NGOs.
Yes.
Dr. Alur, you were saying something. Yeah.
Yeah, basically, you see, I mean, again, on the CBBUS, we have a lot of expectation. See, we actually, invited the applications from eligible institutions in Karnataka. We were trying to really do a best way of identifying and selecting. We had a lot of difficulty. We could do it only after third application, and you cannot expect even CPBOs to behave like the best professional business institutions. There are a lot of expectations on that. It is basically, as Professor Vadivel mentioned, we need to have a multi-pronged approach to ensure that this is done. In case of Karnataka, we are now trying to identify CAPEC as a business supporting institution, which is associated with business development, export orientation in the state of Karnataka. So that will create a platform and that will support the FPOs in the state. If CBBOs, again, it will be too much of expectation. And if we put all these criteria in place, I think we hardly get any CBBOs on the panel.
Thank you. Thanks, all of you. I think it's a very important point that you have raised that we are simply expecting too much from the FPCs and CBBOs, and that too in a short span of time. We know that the Companies Act, the Companies Form, has been around for a very long time. And if you see the number of companies that are registered, I'm not talking about producer companies, but general private limited companies that are registered every month, and how many of them actually go on to say become say public limited, they go for an IPO. If we look at the proportion, right, I mean, it is expected that businesses fail, but then yes, we are looking at FPCs and CBBOs or RIs and expecting them to somehow change this, well-established statistic that certain percentages of businesses may fail, right? Uh, uh, I think the issue here is because of who the shareholders are. The attention that that is that all the FPCs and CPPOs receive is because of the nature of the shareholders, and which brings us back to the point that we were talking about in the report of shareholder protection. We are taking all already vulnerable producers, right?
Yes.
And we are putting them in a situation which is likely to make them worse off, right? Probably that is not the way to go, and we have to think about alternatives. Yeah, there is,
Annapurna, I mean,
yes,
as I mean, we were discussing, see, we have several, business incubators to help and support, handhold the startups in the country. There is a need for the government, the public and private sector to treat and look at FPOs also as startups in agriculture. Whatever the benefits, whatever the facilities, whatever the support that we're extending to startups, the same support has to be given to FPCs. That is one.
That's
And
right.
point number two, we are still trying to struggle and convince the cooperative sector. The farmers cooperatives are receiving a lot of support mechanisms. And if you look at the support that is extended to the FPCs, it's not even 10%. So there is also a need for reforms in the existing system so that we look at FPCs as a flagship program of the government of India and the state governments. In several states, they look at them as the central sector scheme and not as the state sector scheme. And then they focus very little support and extend very little, support for FPCs. So this, disparity has to be brought down, and people in the government should look at FPCs as also emerging startups in the country.
Sure, thank you. So the next question is, what are the suggestions for effective creation of specialized produce clusters, organic, oilseeds, etc.? And can clusters improve capitalization while keeping small and marginal farmers as constituents?
Yeah, see, they can. So again, it's a chicken and an egg situation. The reason, and it happened organically also, is when you have an FPC, but you do not have enough produce to go to the market. What do? You start engaging with farmers to say, okay, let's have a similar product, let's have similar quality, let's have similar timeline, so that we have enough volume to go to the market. Um, and that is happening, right? We are seeing a winner crop in an area, and a lot of NGOs have come together informally and said, okay, let's do these crops in these clusters and develop it as a producer cluster. And it's not new. I mean, there are clusters in the country that exists, right? But typically small and marginal farmers are subsistence farmers, and they have variety of crops for their own requirement. So they have a very different set of cropping pattern, which is changing now. I'm not too sure if it is good or bad, because they are losing the diversity of crops that they had with them in order to produce at a volume so that they can get better price realization. I'm not too sure whether it's right or wrong, but that's the change that is happening. Is uh, some amount of loss of diversity is happening, but to look at it in a different manner also, again there is a little more thrust on traditional crops. So at some point it probably balances out somewhere. So at least in one season you have a winner crop, which is you're growing it in a production cluster approach, and then you also have the own crops that you're growing. So I think this balance needs to be kept in mind some point of time.
I
Yeah.
think this approach, it is 100% it will lend support to the FEO incubation system. All the honeybee FEOs can create a federation and work for their benefit. Like that, all the commodity-based federations within the state within the region, then work together for common benefit, reach the market collectively. So this approach is good. This approach needs to be strengthened. Maybe cluster approach is one thing, but the commodity approach may a commodity may be in different districts, and different minor clusters will get into a larger cluster in the federation. So this special treatment, and they may make special demands to the government and get things done. So this is a welcome future. We need to strengthen it.
Yeah, ODOP, one district, one product, is one such initiative by the government of India. They have tried to look at the major commodity that is geographically, in all aspects it is suitable for that particular district, or it is an indicator crop for the district. They have been identified, and the purpose is to promote such crop which will have a better value, better quality promoted in that. That is one way that we are trying to focus on certain commodities clusters in that is. If you look at taking the example of Karnataka, we have pulse clusters. For example, if you take entire Kalburgi district in Karnataka, so that is called as the pulse bowl of Karnataka state, or even at the national level. So the entire focus can be on the pulse, its production, its valuation, and then enhancing the quality, linking them. All such things can be done. That will have a focused attention. You can also have millet clusters. For example, if you take the Koppal district in Karnataka, the entire focus is on millets. The quality of millets produced in the district itself is of very high quality. If you take example of moringa in case of Tamil Nadu in certain districts, they have promoted that. So the approach is excellent. But we also need to identify FPOs which are focusing on these major crops, try to establish certain common facility centers where all FPOs need not have to invest money in value addition, processing facilities and all that. And such approach can definitely ensure a better remuneration to the farmers, especially the small farmers. This is a good
To
approach.
add Dr. Alur's point, the government of Tamil Nadu has allotted 50 crores to create Moringa zone and bring in all infrastructure for generating value-added products and link it to international market. So that was
Yeah,
possible
such
only because of Moringa companies. They have joined together and formed a federation and approached the government, demanding industry on Moringa.
Right, and these kinds of clusters enable investment of capital, right? Because many different kinds of value addition or processing require substantial sums, and it's very difficult for a single company and the kind of
Yes.
limited produce quantity that it will have to justify
Right.
this kind of financial investment. So clusters like this can make that possible. But at the same time, as Dhruvi pointed out, that sometimes, if you go too far to one extreme, it can lead to ecological consequences. And then there has to be some effort that goes into making sure that there is a cropping cycle that is developed that limits the kind of ecological damage monocropping can have, which in the long run, of course, would make matters worse for the producers.
And the buyer seller meet was part of this zonal program. And till this far, 17 Moringa companies have participated and interacted with the buyers. Only now they understand in cultivation process what are all the areas which we need to take care. See, earlier they have been simply producing bulk without understanding the quality criteria that is expected by a buyer or a processor. Now there is a learning uh, how come back to the farm and how we can refine the cultivation system so that the quality produce can be generated. So it both way it is beneficial. They get contact for business, and also they get enlightened on how to improve the quality of the produce. So the cluster system is always on the positive side. It requires almost all policy support, budget support, and every support.
Yeah, and this connects to another question from one of the participants, which is, when we look at performance, mostly the focus is on profitability, and how can we introduce or measure social or ecological performance or value created differently, right? So this links to Dhruvi's point about in the ecological consequences of extreme cases of monocropping.
Can you still more clear on this question, madam?
So the participant wants to know, are there, besides financial measures, are there other measures of success such as social performance, ecological benefits, and so on? And maybe let me try to address this. Let me start off the discussion, right? So, on the one hand, we would certainly like to see that. Um, on the other, it's a little tricky, right? Because they're struggling with the most fundamental of things, which is to simply start their business, let alone make profits year after year at some stable level. I mean, large corporations struggle with this, right? I mean, they talk about triple bottom line, but very, very few are actually able to make a dent in it. And we are expecting small farmers whose business has not even started or become stable to be able to not only have financial performance measures, but also ecological ones, social ones. It's a very, very high bar to set for small producers. I mean, we would certainly like to see that, but I think we're quite far from there.
No,
Say
I
for
mean, the question is very, interesting. He has raised a very interesting question. Many times when we talk about the performance of any FPOs, we only look at their, profit sheet. That should not be the only case. Criteria to assess any performance. If you look at the indirect contributions of collectivizing farmers into groups, for example, if you are talking about the ecological, contributions of a given FPC or FPO, see, in this case, we are also trying to address the requirements of the crop. Many times, farmers produce crops in the wrong, environmental setup or soils which are not suitable for that crop. All such things are happening. When we are trying to commercially promote a crop, we always look at the suitability of the crop to the soils, to the climatic requirements, climatic characteristic prevailing in the area, and we try to match it with the market demands. So this indirectly brings in a right match between the crops that we are producing and also the ecological thing. If there is any outburst of any pest or disease in a given area, it is possible that a comprehensive approach is promoted to address that. And it is also possible that through a group of 1,000 farmers, we can advocate them, guide them, lead them, help them to follow certain ecological measures, natural farming methods, organic farming methods. It is difficult when they are individual farmers. They can say whatever they want. And many times, in most of the cases, though spray is not required, by seeing one insect or pest, people start spraying. So such things can be advocated through a community approach, through an FPO. When it comes to social, performance, definitely, this will definitely bring in a lot of, reforms in the individuals as members of the FPO. It will directly and indirectly help to build their leadership qualities, their managerial qualities. All this is happening, and we never assess that. How do we assess the leadership? Quality improvement in a given individual. They become managers. They become leaders. They can also use this as a platform to grow in their a political career, in their professional career, all that, and they can set examples to other youngsters in the society. So these are never we never look at this value added to the society through this FPO. We only look at their performance, especially their financial performance. I think it's an extremely good question raised by the participant.
Yeah, and we
let
see
let
that many
let
NGOs, for example, right, when they start these producer organizations, that's what they have in mind, right? That eventually these will become local institutions that bring value to the community that they are part of.
Anyway, let
And
me add one point, madam. Say,
sure.
day is not far off, and each and every FEO will have to manage hundreds of acres on their own cultivation. Maybe it may take a decade, but it is going to happen. Given the labor situation, given the stress on the present agriculture, the companies are expected to manage, consolidate, and manage the lands of the members, 500 acres, 1,000 acres. The day is not far off. Once that happens, then your ecology and other climate, the whole thing will be taken care 100%.
Thank you. I think there is just one last question, and probably I will just attempt to uh, answer from our experience, and after that we can close. Also requesting you to add if there's something. So FPOs may be seen as social enterprises interacting with many stakeholders. In that sense, they have unique challenges in management. What unique capacity building measures are required for FPO staff? I think, yes, this is a very important thing as well, that we have, we are talking about the responsibility to the shareholders, right? We are talking about shareholder protection and so on, which is quite different from a regular company. So I think one way, if we talk about the boards, the governance in producer companies, we have a range of. If you look at the working of boards in producer companies, we actually observe a range. So we have working boards in one smaller FPOs where the directors are also actually doing a lot of work that usually management or the CEO is supposed to do. And at the other end of the spectrum, we'll have governance only boards, and where they have an established CEO and well functioning other departments and so on. So between this, so if we take the spectrum of the boards itself, different kind of boards and their working. So there is hand holding needed, quite differently. Each one, we cannot have a one size fits all kind of approach. And if we take into consideration what kind of activities the FPO is engaged in, something that is engaged purely in aggregation and marketing will need, the staff there will need a different kind of capacity building than those engaged in let us say value addition, processing, and so on. So yes, so the capacity building also has to be tailored depending on what stage the farmer producer company is in. So your thoughts on that, please?
It's a very, prevailing challenge. If you look at the capacity building to address several challenges, for example, if you look at, as Professor Vadivel mentioned in the beginning, different categories of FPOs have different challenges. Their intensity, their momentum is completely different. For example, if you look at the human resource management itself, it is very, very difficult for us to get the trained CEOs to run the companies. We don't have a proper course available across this country, which is exclusively meant for CEOs, would-be CEOs or existing CEOs. There is a need to design a management development programs, executive development programs, certificate courses, diploma courses, postgraduate diploma courses to build the capacities of the CEOs. And it is going to be a big requirement in the days to come. So that is one thing. And if you look at the skill gap, if you look at the skill sets that are required for the CEOs, skill sets that are required for the board of directors of the FPOs, and we also say every 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, we should change the BODs. When the new BOD comes, the same challenges are again posed again. So we need to develop. We have developed as a center of excellence. We have developed a lot of unique programs, modules to exclusively for CEOs, exclusively for BODs, and also with regard to documentation. When you expect them to prepare business models, business proposals, absolutely they don't have any idea about it. It is very difficult for us to build that acumen in their mind, guide them, handhold them to come out with good business proposals which will help the FPOs to grow. And if you look at finance management, many of them, they don't have idea or experience of financial management or even business delivery business negotiation skills. All these are, we have a big list of challenges. Maybe I would request Richard to organize one panel discussion on the challenges faced by FPOs. So that will be a wonderful discussion, and learned panel members can really throw their light and experience. How do we address these challenges? So there are challenges at every step. Before a farmer becomes a member, there are challenges. Once he or she becomes a member of an FPO, there are challenges. Financial management, business management, human resource management, legal compliances. There are several challenges which require very focused attention, and this can happen through focused modules, through training, capacity building, exposures, making them to interact with experts, experienced CEOs. All this can be a combination of different approaches, only will be able to address these issues.
This Center of Excellence Karnataka model, it can be extrapolated to every state in the name of Krishi Business Kendra. Even the Center of Excellence comes under the government control. The idea I promote is the similar functions, Krishi Business Kendra. So Krishi Vigyan Kendra is there in every district across the country, managed by ICR. They do production-driven agriculture. But this Krishi Business Kendra, every state, they will have to generate more enterprising farmers to get them into business. Function-wise, it is similar to this Center of Excellence, but it is under PPP mode, madam. It should not be under the government control. So PPP mode, and corporate and enterprise should handhold it. And this institution mechanism, if it is done across the country in all the state, in course of time, we will be able to generate enterprising farmers in the larger numbers. That will support.
Yeah, I think with this we'll come to the end of today's webinar. Thank you all. Really grateful that you could take time out of your schedules and attend this. I think it was a very insightful and useful conversation and a lot of food for thought. I hope that the participants are also, equally taking home some very useful thoughts, to maybe consider when they are maybe forming FPCs or studying FPCs and so on. Thanks everyone, and I think we can end the session now. We can log out.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you to the
everybody.
panelists and the participants.
Thank you.